The architecture of habit. Assalamu alaikum. Last time, Duckworth showed us that sustained passion and perseverance toward a single goal across years predicts success more reliably than raw talent. But she left something important slightly out of focus. What does sustained effort actually look like, mechanically, on an ordinary Tuesday? What is grit actually made of, moment to moment? Today, we zoom all the way in, from the decade-long arc of a life's ambition down to the smallest possible unit of behavior, a single repeated action, because it turns out that unit is where nearly everything we've discussed in this series actually gets built or lost. We arrive in 2018, the most recent chapter in our chronological journey so far, with James Clear, writer who spent years studying habit formation after recovering from a severe injury as a teenager, an experience that left him fascinated by how small consistent actions compound into major life outcomes over time. Clear synthesized decades of behavioral science, much of it building directly on psychological principles we've already encountered, into a single accessible framework in his book Atomic Habits. The word atomic was deliberate. He wanted to describe habits as both tiny, almost invisible units of behavior and as the fundamental building blocks from which much larger life outcomes are constructed. Clear's central claim was that meaningful change rarely comes from single dramatic decisions. It comes from the compounding effect of small habits, repeated consistently over long stretches of time. Improving by just 1% daily, he argued, produces radically different long-term outcomes than staying static, even though the day-to-day difference feels negligible in the moment. He organized habit formation around what he called the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, addressing the cue that triggers a habit. Make it attractive, addressing the craving that drives desire for it. Make it easy, reducing friction in the actual behavior itself. And make it satisfying, ensuring an immediate reward reinforces repetition. Critically, Clear reframed identity as the real engine of lasting habit change. The goal isn't simply to complete an action, but to become, through repeated small evidence, the kind of person for whom that action is now simply normal. Sociologically, Clear's emphasis on environment design offered a meaningful corrective to decades of individual willpower-centered advice. He argued, drawing on real behavioral research, that people consistently overestimate the power of motivation and underestimate the power of their surrounding environment, the visible cues, easy defaults, and social norms that quietly shape behavior long before willpower is ever required. This connects directly back to concerns raised earlier in the series about the limits of individual-focused frameworks like grit and mindset. If environment shapes habit formation this powerfully, then families, schools, workplaces, physical and social design bears real responsibility for which habits form easily and which require constant, exhausting resistance. It reframed self-discipline itself as an significant part, a design problem, not purely a matter of character. Psychologically, Clear's framework integrates the habits loop research of behavior psychology with the identity-based motivation we saw hinted at in Maslow and fully developed in Dweck's mindset work. His insistent that identity change drives lasting habit change more than outcome-based goal alone, echoes Dweck's finding that how you interpret your own actions shapes what you do next, and Bandura's insight that self-belief is built through repeated direct evidence of your own capability. What Clear added distinctly was a granular, almost engineering level focus on the mechanics of the single habit loop, breaking Bandura's broad concept of mastery experiences down into the specific controllable variables queue, craving, response, reward that determine whether a given action is likely to repeat itself automatically without requiring ongoing conscious willpower at all. But Atomic Habits, too, has drawn genuine critiques. Critics note that Clear's framework, while highly practical, is built more on synthesis of existing behavioral science and compelling narrative than on original, rigorously tested research of his own, and that some of its most quotable claims, like the oft-repeated idea that habits form in a fixed number of days, oversimplify a psychological literature that shows generally wide variation across individuals and behaviors. There's also familiar structural concern. Habit stacking, environment design, and identity-based motivation all assume a degree of stable routine, autonomy over one's physical space, and freedom from constant crisis that isn't equally available to everyone. Someone working multiple jobs with an unpredictable schedule faces a generally different habit formation challenge than Clear's relatively stable, controlled examples often assume. Why does a 2018 book still matter today? Because Atomic Habit became the dominant popular vocabulary for translating decades of behavioral psychology into daily actionable practice. Habit stacking, environment design, and identity-based habits are now common language in coaching, productivity culture, and even clinical behavior change programs. It gave people a concrete, mechanical answer to a question every theory in the series eventually circles back to. Given that I understand what I need and even believe I can achieve it, what do I actually do today? In the next 5 minutes, it also offers a quite useful corrective to an attention economy engineered around exactly the same behavioral mechanics Clear describes, just aimed in the opposite direction. Understanding the habit loop that builds a generally beneficial routine is the same knowledge required to recognize when that identical loop is instead being used to keep you compulsively scrolling. So we add this precise mechanical layer to everything built before. Carnegie taught us to connect. Maslow mapped what we need. Bandura gave us belief. Mihaly described engagement. Dweck explained resilience. Goleman taught us emotional management. Covey gave us principles. Duckworth shows us the long arc of sustained passion. And now Clear shows us the smallest possible unit all of that is actually built from. One small repeated action compounding quietly over time. Every idea in this series, in the end, answers some version of the same enduring question at a different scale. How does a human being actually grow? Carnegie answered at the level of a single conversation. Duckworth answered at the level of a decade. Clear answers at the level of a single Tuesday morning. Put together, they describe the same truth from every possible distance. Growth is never one dramatic leap. It's a life, built one deliberate, repeated choice at a time. Thank you and see you next time.